It's too bad YouTube doesn't have smell-o-vision. Just took that apple pie out of the oven. And today on My Maine Matters, we're going to have a lumberman story from up at the West Branch of the Penobscot River. So get something to eat and a warm beverage and settle back for a Penobscot tale about spike-sole boots. So I need to thank Paul Reynolds. You all got to know Paul Reynolds. He's a author, Maine author, Maine guide, host of Maine Outdoors on WVOM for many years. And he's also a painter. He sent me this print that he painted. It's called Moose on the Saboas. And if you don't know Paul, he has a deer camp, and the stories go they are the skulkers of Saboas. And I had to have this painting of Paul's in particular, because David Libbey, who's the main character in I Am Penobscot, my latest novel, well, David, when he was a young boy, lived on that river and hunted and fished and saw quite a number of moose there. So I specifically requested this print. So thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate it. Well, the pie turned out great. Not that crusty crust. Forget about smell-o-vision. You need Wonka-vision so I can send you a piece. Hi there. I'm Tommy Carbone, Maine author and explorer. Today, on My Maine Matters, we're not out exploring on a trail, but rather I have a special Christmas edition episode for you. But it's still related to Maine history in the Maine Northwoods north of Mooseheadlake. It's a lumberman story, or tale, from the Maine Northwoods, up around Ripogenus and the Ripogenus Dam and the West Branch of the Penobscot River. And the episode is brought to us by a Maine author from way back when, Holman F. Day, who was a newspaper editor. He wrote over a dozen novels and a couple of books on verse, or ballads as we call them, that characterize Maine life in his humorous way, and they're quite interesting to read. In Day's books of ballads, he often started out with a story before he got into his verse. And to honor that tradition, I'll remind you today with a story about the river drivers' most important piece of their attire, and that was their spike-sole boots. The men rarely took them off, and if you've read The Penobscot Man, Life and Death on a Maine River, you'll get an appreciation of the men in their spike-sole boots. And we also have specific stories about spike-sole boots in Fannie's short stories, Penobscot River Tales, which I've recently published and annotated, which is a great addition. So when the men were on their river drives, they rarely took those spike-sole boots off because they were necessary equipment when they were out on the drive, whether they were walking or running logs or breaking a jam. And in that Fannie Hardy Eckstorm, the new book, there's a fabulous story about Louis Ketchum and spike-sole boots. Louis was a Penobscot and a river driver and a friend of Manly Hardy. Fannie spoke with him way up into the early 1900s. Well, Louis was part of a drive crew, and they were out picking a jam. One man had already gone over the falls. He'd been given up for dead. Louis was the last man on the logs. He was out there getting that last log pushed and going. And his friend, Big Nikolai, was in the boat, in the bateau, holding against the jam, while the others in the bateau were waiting to row them to safety, or pull them to safety. And Louis was scrambling over what was left of the jam as all those logs were breaking free to go down the Penobscot. And the jam broke away fast. The logs began to move, and it caught Louis by complete surprise. And he had a choice to make, and Nikolai knew it as well. In Louis's mind, it was either drowning and going over the falls, which he didn't really want to think about. Big Nikolai also knew what was going through Louis's mind. The river was roaring, men were yelling, logs were peeling away apart one by one and drifting down the river. And Louis was hopping, trying to get to that bateau, but the bateau was kind of shifting away. And Louis had one chance. Nikolai knew it, Louis knew it. Big Nikolai yelled out, "Go ahead, Louis, jump, don't worry about me, just jump." And that's how Nikolai was laid up for a couple months out of work. Louis came crashing into that boat, and those long spikes went into Big Nikolai's thigh. And Never said a word about it. That was the kind of man that he was, and he would have done it for any river driver. And Louis had been in the boat, he would have done the same thing for Big Nikolai. Spike-sole boots are lifesavers when they're out there on the logs, and in other situations they became dangerous. And in this situation that we're going to hear today from Holman Day, it's kind of a humorous, dangerous situation. So the main controversy in this ballad is over the men being asked to remove their spike-sole boots. And it was published originally in Holman Day's Pine Tree Ballads. And there's a certain truth to that request because what Holman Day covered, which he did a lot, he covered political and social themes of the day, and the Maine state legislature once outlawed spike-sole boots from being worn on trains or in establishments because the men were just tearing up the floors and upholstery in places. So this here is the story of when Murphy's crew walked 15 miles to attend to some business at Rapo-Genus. I'll call it Rapo-Genus because that's what the Lumbermen called it, and that's how Holman Day titled his poem. It was a time when Murphy's crew was victorious against a more friendly enemy than the river, and all on account of their spike-sole boots. So this here is a ballad of driving camp, and it's titled The Rapo-Genus Christmas Ball by Maine's Mr. Holman F. Day. There had been no social doings since the drive had passed the flume, and the section from Sabumic to the chutes was rather blue. So the folks at Rapo-Genus, where there's rum enough in room, arranged a Christmas function and invited Murphy's crew. The folks at Rapo-Genus hired Ezra Huson's hall and posted up the notice for our yearly Christmas ball. Now Murphy's crew was willing, and they walked the 15 miles and arrived at Rapo-Genus wearing most benignant smiles. The genial floor director waited near the outer door and pleasantly suggested they remove the boots they wore. He said that Rapo-Genus wished to make of this affair an elegant occasion, recherché and debonair. So it seemed the town's opinion, after many long disputes, that 'twas time to change the custom and exclude the spike-sole boots. He owned 'twas rather drastic and would cause a social jar twixt up Ambergegis and the twin Penobscotriver. But 'tis settled, so he told them, that nary lady likes to do these fancy dances with a gent what's wearing spikes. So I ask ye very kindly, but I ask ye one and all, to leave your brogan caulkers on the outside of this hall. This here is sort of sudden, said the boss of Murphy's crew. Just excuse us for a minute, but we don't know what to do. We've attended social functions at the Upper Churchill Chutes, and the smartest set they had there was a-wearing spike-sole boots. Excuse us for the mention, but we feel compelled to say 'tisn't fair to shift a fashion all of a sudden this 'ere way. And the local delegation, when it came with the invite, omitted patent leathers in its mention of tonight. So I guess you'll have to take us with these spikes upon our soles. We can't appear in stockings, 'cause the most of us have holes. But the genial floor director guarded still the outer door and declared that gents with spikers weren't allowed upon the floor. He said 'twas very awkward that special guests should thus be kept in outer darkness, and he didn't want a fuss. But so long as Rapo-Genusites had issued their decree, he hadn't any option, as a gent with sense could see. So he passed his ultimatum, ye must shed them spike-sole boots, for we hain't the sort of humstrums that ye'll find at Churchill Chutes. Then up spoke Smoky Finnegan, the boss of Murphy's crew. Said he, the push at Churchill shan't be slurred by such as you. We're gents that's very gentle, and we never make a fuss. But in slurring folks at Churchill, ye are also slurring us. We have introduced the fashions up at Churchill quite a while, and no Rapo-Genus half-breeds have the right to trig our style. If ye've dropped the vogue of spikers at the present Christmas ball, we will start the fashion over, good and solid. That is all. So, mister, please excuse us, but you'll open up your sluice, or God have mercy on ye, if I turn these gents here loose. Then the genial floor director shouted back within the room, "Oh, men of Rapo-Genus, there is trouble at the boom." But even as he shouted, with a rush and crush and roar, like a bursting jam of timber, Murphy's angels stormed the door. Then against them rose the sawyers of the Rapo-Genus mill, who rallied for the conflict with a most intrepid will. But by new decree of fashion, they were wearing boughten suits, and even all the boomsmen had put off their spike-sole boots. So that gallant crew of Murphys simply trod upon their feet, and backward, howling, cursing, they compelled them to retreat. The air was full of slivers as the spikers chewed the floor, and the man whose feet were punctured didn't battle anymore. "Now, fellas, boom the outfit," shouted Finnegan the boss. His choppers formed a cordon, and they swept the room across. The people who were standing at the walls in double ranks were pulled and thrown to center at the order, "Clear the banks." Then they herded Rapo-Genus in the middle of the room and slung themselves around it like a human pocket boom. All the matrons and the maidens were as frightened as could be when Finnegan commanded, "Now, collect the boomage fee." At a corner of the cordon, they arranged a sorting gap, and one by one the women were escorted from the trap. And without a word of protest, as they drifted slowly through, they paid their tolls and kisses to the men of Murphy's crew. And at last, when all the women had been sorted from the crowd, the men were second-raters, so the boss of Murphy's vowed, "We will raft them down as pulp stuff," and he yelled to close about. "Now, my hearties, start the windlass," ordered he. "We'll warp 'em out." Through the doorway, down the stairway, grim and struggling, thronged the press, all the brawn of Rapo-Genus, fighting hard without success. They were herded down the middle of the Rapo-Genus street. If they tried to buck the center, they were bratted on the feet. They were yarded at the river. Murphy's peavies smashed the ice, though the men of Rapo-Genus couldn't smash that human vice that held them, jammed them, forced them. When the water touched their toes, then at last they fought like demons for to save their boughten clothes. But as fierce were Murphy's Hardys, and their spikers helped them win, for they kicked and spurred their victims, and they dragged them shrieking in. Then with water to their shoulders there they kept them in the wet, while they gave them points on breeding and the rules of etiquette. And at midnight 'twas decided by a universal vote that the strict demands of fashion do not call for vest or coat, that twixt up ambergris and the twin dipscanaquois, shirts of red and checkered flannel are the smartest form by far, and that gents may chew tobacco was declared and always fit, if they only use discretion as to when and where they spit. And above all future cavil, sneer or jeer or vain disputes, high was set this social edict: gents may wear their spike-sole boots. Then the men of Rapo-Genus and the men of Murphy's crew, they dissolved their joint convention. They were near dissolving too. And to counteract the action of the water on their skin, they applied some balming lotion to the proper parts within. Then they danced till ruddy morning, and their drying garments steamed, and awful was the shrinkage of those $7 suits. And the feet of Murphy's woodsmen gashed and slashed and seamed, till a steady rain of slivers rained behind those bradded boots. And all disputes of etiquette were buried once for all at that Christmas social function, the Rapo-Genus Ball. That there is the Rapo-Genus Christmas Ball by Maine's Mr. Holman F. Day. I hope you enjoyed it. And from up here in the Maine Northwoods, Merry Christmas to all.